at the core, we're still essentially doing the same things as before. Our opponents have more modern weapons, but we also have more advanced defenses. AI as an add-on, as a tag attached to product names is actually more hype than substance. Every year we publish a security report, and this year we've released an AI-specific security report, which highlights a wide variety of different key findings. The very first thing is that artificial intelligence, or AI in this context, is now being used by both the bad guys and the good guys. That means we have to arm ourselves technologically with artificial intelligence to have the speed of automation and the capabilities on our side.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Shall Be C-Level Priority, the podcast that puts the digital world to the test. Cyber attacks are on the rise, and data is the most valuable asset in today's world. But how can we protect what matters most to us? Drawing on the latest insights, effective strategies, and practical tools, we'll show you how to create a more secure digital environment. Because one thing is clear: security isn't negotiable, it's a top priority.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Cybersecurity Chefsache, the podcast. Today with Marco. Hello, Marco.
Hello.
For those who don't know you yet, tell us a few sentences about yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, Nico. Marco Eggerling is my name in this role as Global CISO at Checkpoint. I have been working in information security for over 25 years now, a long time ago. And I think if I sum up the last 25 years in one sentence, I would say that at the core, we are still doing basically the same things. Our adversaries have more modern weapons now, but we also have more modern defenses. I started my journey with cryptography and forensics, so it was very, very technology focused. At some point, I took a different path. And at the end of my academic training, which I completed alongside my job, I eventually studied IT law at the University of Edinburgh. I did that because I simply wanted to understand how the compliance apparatus works and how lawmakers think. And I think that helps me in the role I have now. But of course, it also brings its own set of challenges, because I keep reading these legal texts that come at us in the GRC world, and I keep asking myself, did the people who wrote this actually think it through? Or is it just one of those products that have been put on the market? That might sound negative now. We've seen a lot of really good GRC examples in Germany, Europe, and also around the world. But Nico, you'll agree with me, there are definitely some cases where we all wonder what happened there. Who built this thing and what is the author trying to tell us? That's about me. It's nice to be here.
Yes, you've actually already brought up the topic. And maybe before we get into the actual topic, because we want to talk about whether AI defense is a necessity or just hype, let me ask you a provocative question right away. Is AI still just a hype topic, or have we already reached the mainstream?
I think that's literally the $100 million question. Why do I mention that number? There's a headline making the rounds in the news right now. Sam Altman, the current CEO of OpenAI, is publicly criticizing the statements made by Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook and current chairman of Meta. He went ahead and announced a signing on budget of $100 million to lure the best people from OpenAI into his own program at Meta, simply to push AI development forward there. Those are amounts that would probably make the average person lose their mind. Me too. That's why I would go so far as to say we're still a long way from reaching the mainstream. But the thing is, it's just barely past that first tipping point of a hype cycle. You can see that in things like the fact that by now, probably everyone knows what ChatGPT is, since we were just talking about OpenAI. And some people out there have probably already played around with these kinds of tools. But I still firmly believe that we have a lot of educational work to do. But I also want to make a clear distinction here. At least in my mind, there are experts, the pioneers who've been working with AI for decades. Basically, it's mathematics, statistical mathematics, to be precise. And then there are those who use it on the application, user, and ultimately also on the operational side. And personally, despite my background in cryptography and forensics, I would count myself more as part of the second group because I'm not one of the founders. I taught myself most of it to a certain extent, learned by doing. But there are also a few things where I have to admit that's where my expertise ends, with the intricacies. But we can definitely talk about that in more detail in a moment.
But another interesting topic, especially when we look at AI, which we already discussed beforehand, is that now every manufacturer is slapping an AI label onto their product. But if we're going to talk about AI defense, we really need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. Defense already started back then with anomaly detection, with behavior-based recognition, with hash patterns, and so on and so forth. From your perspective, is this topic of AI defense actually something that has existed for many, many years? But now, because of the hype around ChatGPT and similar technologies, it's basically become, let's say, AI defense 2.0.
Yes, I would say so. Why? If you go back in time a bit, Tim, not going all the way back to the 1940s, to Alan Turing, the British mathematician who cracked the Enigma, but let's start about 10 or 15 years ago. That's when the trend began to automate things. That was really the core essence of it all. And for automation, you basically need two things: a well-functioning business process and a clearly defined goal. That's what people started building 10 or 15 years ago with the defense algorithms, which are now standard applications in today's technologies, right? If you think back to your old heuristic patterns, to your antivirus solutions, at some point they started pulling their signatures from the cloud. Then those were automatically integrated, enriched, and distributed across the technologies accordingly. Even back then, those were already machine learning algorithms running in the background, which were made available and used to drive automation in those technologies. This whole thing has a it has a very, very, very long history. It's not a reinvention. And I want to say at this point, even if it's an unpopular opinion, AI is not something you buy as a product. It's not. AI is a component of something that helps us create automation for certain business processes or workflows. In the context of information security, I especially need to think about what I want to automate and to what extent I can actually achieve automation at all. And if I really want to make meaningful use of this whole AI topic, automation based on deep learning mechanisms, algorithms that can also access different pods and ultimately influence very, very deep and rapid decisions, then I need two other things. I need good data quality. Most companies are still not there yet. And I need people who are well versed in the whole subject, including the mathematics behind it, so that I can specifically build something for my use cases. If I don't have one of the two, then I have to rely on generic solutions. And basically, that's where we as manufacturers come. And those are technologies we've developed for the market, which work and, broadly speaking, help the companies that use them and the users who interact with them to achieve the level of automation that is possible for them. And alongside that, there are those who say, that's not enough for me. I want to build more myself. But then you're back to that bell curve, right? You have those on the left of it and those on the right. And that applies equally to artificial intelligence as it does to any other topic.
And you're bringing up an important topic right now, namely use cases. How often have I experienced this with customers, partners, when this whole AI hype with Copilot, ChatGPT, and the like started? Yeah, we want to use AI. We want to use Copilot. We want to use ChatGPT. And my first question was always, so what do you actually want to achieve with it? Well, we want to use it. We want to take advantage of the benefits of AI. But honestly, when it comes to actual use cases, we don't really know yet. And then you get headlines like employee finds the CEO's salary lists through Copilot, that kind of thing, right? And I think when we talk about this topic of AI defense, we also have to talk about the fact that even when we're talking about defense, you need use cases and a concept even without AI. And especially with AI in general, you need a concept for how to handle it and not just say, yeah, we want AI. And to once again reinforce what you just said, also regarding this topic of just slapping AI onto something and calling it a feature, a new function, you really have to think about what AI actually means beyond that. Is it just a chatbot now? Or is it really something AI-based that actually does something with my problem or can even defend something? I think that's also a problem where we have this threshold between marketing nonsense and real technology.
I agree with you. AI as an attachment, as a tag at the end of product names, is actually more hype than substance, yes. Let me give you a little insight into how Check Point internally went through this journey with artificial intelligence. We haven't just started working on this topic yesterday. For us, it's something that's been in the making for over 15 years now. Every IT security department, every InfoSec program, every security domain or pillar, however, these are ultimately identified within companies, has one thing in common. We are basically lazy and try to create as little friction as possible through as much automation as possible. But that's not just because we're lazy people. It's mainly because we are overwhelmed with things. And the same approach applies internally for us as well. Over 15 years ago, we tried to answer the question, what automation capabilities do the technical controls we use internally actually have? Checkpoint does build technologies designed for the market, but the use cases, what these technologies are ultimately supposed to achieve are, for the most part, intrinsic. That means we build defenses that are also usable for us because we use them internally, and these eventually become products. And then many, many years ago, someone came along and asked the question, how many of these controls, which are not Checkpoint technologies, third-party ones that we also use, how many of them already have automation capabilities based on machine learning? So that's where it all started. And then we sat down and simply started asking around Hugging Face and all the other platforms out there, these repositories that exist similar to GitHub. You could basically say Hugging Face is kind of the AI version of GitHub. I know the engineering world is going to be upset now, but let's just simplify, right? It was kind of a pool of ideas just to see what's out there. And from there, it developed to the point where we could say that internally, we differentiate between deep learning algorithms, which really cover very specific use cases, and in parallel, machine learning algorithms, which are broader in scope, and then dedicated AI patterns that solve structural problems and achieve automation, which in turn cover individual use cases. And you can already see these development curves here, this value pyramid as well. AI is the very top of it all. If you want to try to use artificial intelligence, assuming it actually is intelligent at the end of the product, if you want to achieve that, then first and foremost, you have to think about what data am I working with? What structures can I work with? And how can I actually achieve what I need in a way that truly benefits me, right? And if you put all that together and compare it to the technologies currently on the market, and I'm really trying to stay objective here, a lot of it is snake oil, where you really have to say, okay, look, friends, sure, AI, just because it's trendy right now. If you go to the RSA conference, which took place again in Frisco a few weeks ago, or there are 1,000 different vendors there. It's in Hanover this October, there will be about 850. Let's make a bet with all your listeners. Just go to grab a piece of paper, and as you walk past the booths, make a mark each time you see AI or KI written somewhere. And then get together and compare your numbers. I assume it won't be 850, but it also won't be just 80.
I find it a super exciting topic because I saw the same kind of hype with attack detection. Maybe you remember when in Germany it was regulated through the IT Security Act that companies in critical infrastructure had to implement attack detection. That was huge. I went to the ISA and suddenly everyone was saying, we have attack detection, we do attack detection, IDS, IPS, attack detection. And I thought to myself, guys, OT attack detection is something completely different from IT attack detection. Just saying, but you could really see that the market was clamoring for attack detection because of the BSI's requirements. And suddenly everyone was advertising attack detection. They sprang up like mushrooms. Then it was just attack detection everywhere.
On that topic, this is really just anecdotal. Before my time at Checkpoint, I worked in consulting for a very long time and was able to take on many, many exciting roles. And we had a client, a DAX-listed company from Germany that has a large yard with production facilities. Yes, this company wanted to implement detection and anomaly detection, so security baselining in the OT environment through the COSO, the Chief Operations Security Officer. And there are various technologies out there on the market that claim they can connect to a blast furnace, a dairy machine, a pill press, and all sorts of other equipment, and then document these security deviations. We tried it out ourselves. The reality is, with these things, if you have technologies from companies like Yokogawa and the like, yes, and Siemens and Schneider Electric and so on, these devices don't have any protocols at all that would allow you to control them digitally. That means you need an interpreter for that, let alone having the possibility to plug the whole thing into some IP port and manage it centrally from there, right? If you really And this is really, let's just ignore the fact that there's carpet IT, meaning the stuff we deal with every day, right? If you really want to secure production IT properly, then you would have to start by bringing this production apparatus into the 21st century in the first place, equipping it with modern interfaces, and then giving it built-in defense capabilities. And only then does it make sense. And then you can start thinking about connecting my OT world to a SIEM via these technology interfaces in between, using the Purdue model at the higher levels. Then I can have it do baselining for me, and from the baselining I can detect deviations, and then I can initiate remediations based on that. For example, I can quarantine my blast furnace if it's not behaving as it should, or if the weld seams and car production deviate, then I stop the production and so on. Honestly, Nico, that would be cool if we could get to that point. That would really be Jason Bourne level, right? But that's still a long, long way off.
And you just brought up an important point. I actually learned something new again yesterday because I recorded an episode with my good buddy Malte. And then there was a quiz question. What is the Purdue model? And honestly, I had never heard of it before. And that's another problem, this Purdue free line of defense, three defense in depth, and all the different technical terms for the same topic or things that are announced as something new. It's the same with AI. And maybe to come back to the topic of defense, what I really notice in the market when we talk about AI defense is the topic of SIEM, EDR, XDR, Maryland R, and all the other fancy terms that exist for it. How do you see the whole thing? Is that really for you a truly fundamental innovation in technology? Especially now, the difference between EDR and XDR. So for everyone who doesn't know the difference yet, EDR is endpoint detection and response, and XDR is extended endpoint and response. At the end of the day, I always find it super difficult what is what and where are there actually real differences. I see this a lot, especially when we talk about AI, AI defense. How do you see it?
I actually have two different opinions on that. First, I'll give my professional perspective as in the role I'm currently in at Checkpoint. Every year we release a security report, and this year we published an AI-specific security report, which highlights a lot of very different key points. We can go into one or another of these points during our conversation if you'd like. The takeaway regarding your question about EDR, XDR technologies with AI, well, the very first thing is that artificial intelligence, or AI in this context, is being used by both the bad guys and the good guys. That means we have to arm ourselves technologically with artificial intelligence in order to have the speed of automation and the capabilities on our side, because we can assume that we are being attacked by algorithms that no longer require any human involvement. If you hang around today somewhere on the darknet or deep web, there are all sorts of marketplaces where you can have tools built or subscribe to toolkits and then connect to services and so on. These are all basically early service models that have been tested for a long time and are based on GPT technology, like what ChatGPT is. There's WarmGPT, BED, XXX, and whatever else they're called. And at this point, please let me appeal to everyone listening. Don't go out and mess around with this stuff, folks. There's a reason why this is considered criminal technology. It's better to stay clean and learn how to specifically defend against all this rather than getting your own hands dirty with it. You end up in a legal gray area pretty quickly, and then the lawyer in me comes out, and I think, yeah, we're all doing just fine as we are right now. We don't need any extra problems. But back to the point, what we've seen is that attackers are using technologies that are AI-based. That means we also have to work with AI defense algorithms on our side to have those capabilities. This means proactively training AI technologies, using patterns, using the various things that are repeatedly promoted in the MITRE ATT CK framework, the things you learn from vulnerability assessments within your own organization or from threat research that we can consume. Checkpoint's CPR team has a threat feed that you can subscribe to yourself. We provide it to customers who are interested. All of these are data points that can be integrated into these defense algorithms and ultimately can be used to create a defense pyramid. And the most important thing is to actually do it. You know, you can't wait until someone comes along and says, I've now carved out the ultimate solution, because A, it won't exist. And B, the longer you wait, the more likely you are to become a victim.
Yes. And I think what we also must not forget is that it's not always one and the same thing, just like zero trust. Everyone talks about zero trust, but everyone understands something different by it. And I think that's also a problem when we talk about AI, that we don't have a standardized definition. Because as I said at the beginning, when it comes to security, AI often just means I have a Copilot integration or a ChatGPT connection to look things up. Take example 7, that I can quickly search through playbooks or that I can just create something on the fly. But that doesn't mean that the AI is actually handling the defense. So something like the AI now decides you may and you may not. And I think that's also a problem when we talk about AI defense. At the end of the day, what really is AI defense? And what is AI in defense?
Maybe let's get a bit technical for a moment at this point. If you look at how an EDR solution works, it still has a lot to do with these old traditional signature-based or heuristic-based approaches. Of course, many modern new approaches have now been added, which include decision-making processes, including the path from A to B. What we can effectively advance with AI is the speed and depth of data penetration. It gets outsourced, that's automation. I no longer have to process everything on the respective endpoint itself. Instead, I can also access some of the compute resources that are available in the cloud, if that's what I want. I bring those in and simply let both run in parallel in double time. And then quite automatically, you find yourself in discussions about data lakes and data streams. And these data streams are then either subjective for each application or they flow into larger pods. And from there, data science is carried out or it is handled via commercial tools, which fundamentally do nothing different. The AI aspect behind this is, above all, that several algorithms exist side by side, performing tasks in coordination with each other. This is really the 30,000-foot view of the whole thing. That means usually it's not a single variation of an AI-enhanced process running there, but typically several machine learning or deep learning algorithms that build on each other and then feed into such an AI process approach. If I've understood that, then I'm also able to say my technology is based on AI defense algorithms, because those things are there to perform pattern recognition. They're there to ingest threat intelligence, and they simply look at what's the big picture, what's happening in the world. And then these algorithms can actively point out, you need to look over there. Something's happening in that corner right now. Don't look here, look there. And then, of course, the dynamics change extremely quickly. We're talking milliseconds here, not a whole day. If I've understood this correctly, then I can go ahead and say, specifically for an EDR solution or an XDR product or perimeter protection solution or north-south solution or whatever else I want to use in the infrastructure, I can then establish specific use cases, which I can then address based on automations that are in turn powered by AI components via KIP and that I want to process. As a simple example, let's take email, which every company has in-house. When you receive an email today, it's usually found in the HR department. There's an applicant applying for a role and there's a PDF attached at the moment. So now this endpoint goes and stores it somewhere in the user space. The person sitting in front of the computer double clicks the email, sees the attachment and opens it. The operating system interprets this file, opens it and displays it. There could potentially be something malicious hidden behind a piece of code, an X-frame, or some kind of jump link to something else, whatever is in their end, and then it detonates. If I use an EDR approach that is based on artificial intelligence, then this detonation, just like you know it from the traditional AV world, takes place somewhere in the sandbox. It then interprets the content and determines whether it is good or not, and either shows it to the user or not. We go so far as to say that, for example, on mobile devices, but also on endpoints, this is not really possible. With these checkpoint technologies that we provide, we continue to display things that are, for example, in a PDF file, but we simply block the malicious content and do not allow it to go any further. That means if you now receive a PDF file that contains something like a button you can click or an active field or something similar, that element is simply muted. You still have the same document, but the harmful content is no longer there. It's simply gone because we overlay what the PDF file used to be with something like a JPEG. And AI does that. That means what you could have previously accomplished manually with a lot of effort, or what would have been technologically possible for you with significant processing power, just not in that quantity and especially not in that time frame. This can then be automated using this AI mechanism. And that's just one example out of countless others. Internally, we use more than 50 different AIs that secure our technology stack and provide automation. And all of them generally have a very, very dedicated scope, an area of effect, and they are very good at that because that's what they were built for. That means from Check Point's perspective, we don't claim to have one AI that solves all the world's problems. Rather, these individual components do what they are designed to do, and they generally do it very well. And alongside them, there are other capabilities. And then there's these handshake between the machine learning algorithms, which prepare and process things, and the automation engines, which then implement everything. And the human who works on it.
You're bringing up an important topic for me, one that I've heard time and again. People who try to find the all-in-one solution in AI saying, I've got a tool that does email security, XDR, Idaho R, Maryland R, SIEM, SOC, incident response, and you name it. I think that's exactly the issue here. Especially, as you already mentioned, an AI always has a specific focus. And I think what works quite well, and this is also my approach, is to try to enable as much interaction as possible between systems. So always aiming to, for example, link results you get from XDR with the email system, because then the email system can take that into account in the future. But what I don't think is a good idea, and maybe you can share your personal opinion on this, is when we end up with systems that can do a bit of everything, that claim, I just do everything with AI. And in the end, you have this situation that many people actually wish for. I come into my office in the morning, there's a note on the printer that says, I'm safe. Then I get my coffee, sit down at my desk and start working because I have my note. I'm safe. That's what some companies are hoping for. And some are also hoping that it will work with AI. I always say, guys, stop, because AI can, of course, only look at things from which it can learn, or rather, AI can't make the decision for you that something different is going to happen in your company, something that is actually desired, but suddenly is no longer wanted by the AI. So I also see a bit of a danger there. I put it this way, of just leaving AI on autopilot and not doing anything anymore.
There are already countless examples from industry where companies have rushed ahead a bit too quickly and have done exactly that. They simply hand over these business critical processes to some algorithm, whether they've paid for it or built it themselves or both, and ended up somewhat unhappy with the results, without naming any names here. There's a company in the aviation industry. They used the chatbot in their ticket sales, and a customer came along and got the AI to confirm in a way that was admissible in court that they would receive a full refund of the purchase price. You know this example. Anyone who doesn't know it should just Google it, European aviation company. And the company then basically had to come clean in court and say, yes, we stand by it. The person went ahead and essentially used the argument of the Turing test. The Turing test in a nutshell. I'm sitting in front of a computer, chatting with something. And if I can no longer tell whether I'm chatting with Nico or Marco or with some AI, then the Turing test has been passed. People assume, and Nico, I assume, though this doesn't apply to every single listener of your podcast, but there are a great many people who sit in front of the television in the evening and listen to their favorite television channel, listening to the news anchor speak. And then, let's say in generic language, they go on to explain how terrible and evil everything about AI is. The reality is, the average person at a certain point, and I think we're reaching that point soon, can no longer clearly distinguish between there's a human sitting there, that's Nico on the other side typing, or that's Marco sitting there, and that's an AI. And when we reach the point where we can no longer clearly tell the difference, that's when things get interesting and also critical. And then we need, and this brings me back to what I said earlier with the lawyer in me waking up, we need very clear regulations on how to protect the public from the missteps of artificial intelligence, of a chatbot, of automation, how to shield people from that, classifications in terms of risk models according to the AI Act that we all have. The further development of this, which in the coming years will go much deeper and address the whole thing, not just in a homeopathic dose, with the goal of ensuring that people can actually tell the difference. But here's the example of the Thermomix. You know it, right? That's the thing with one button that can do everything from soup to schnitzel. Now, if you think about it, Thermomix is just an example here. And this isn't meant as a dig at the company. It's a great product. We don't have one, but I'm sure it's great. if you use a device like that and say it's an example of artificial intelligence, then you're basically entrusting your entire kitchen to this thing. Everything that's produced in terms of food now comes out of that device. If I attack that device now, or if there's any kind of vulnerable technology available there, and the Thermomix example fits, because there are several real life cases from Warbeck where this device was hacked and recipes were manipulated, and people ended up cooking some weird stuff that didn't taste good at all because the recipes had been tampered with in. That's exactly what happens. Then the AI is put into a situation where, based on the very limited amount of information provided and the context that has been made known or familiar to it, it makes a consequential decision on that a human sitting in front of it would potentially need many, many years of learning and experience to fully grasp and understand from all angles. But this thing has never been trained to do that in this environment, on this scale. So at this point, a really, really, really clear warning: use AI. Great, go for it. Integrate AI into business processes. Fantastic. By all means, just give it a try. But please, please, please keep Pandora's box closed and don't give this thing the chance to just do whatever it wants while we watch, because it's simply not ready yet. We will get to that point. It is inevitably possible to steer the roadmap in that direction and say that at some point this will in some way replace the way we cooperate in business, how people interact with companies, and even how people interact with each other. But right now, all of this is still in its infancy, and companies are facing far, far more areas of risk than there are ways to protect themselves. So from someone who has been in the industry for a while and has seen some crazy things, use it in small homeopathic doses, apply it sensibly, let it mature alongside, and don't let it get out of hand or be swept away by some hype that says everything now has to be AI. That's the better way.
Maybe let's take a look at the other side, namely the use of AI by attackers. I also find that super exciting. We've just talked a lot about how AI defense works. Also, thanks again for explaining it so deeply and technically. I think that was great. And for some listeners, it was certainly super interesting to have it explained that way. Now, up until about a year and a half ago, there were a lot of reports about deepfakes. We've talked a lot about deepfakes. We've talked a lot about how they work. What I find so fascinating also from an expert's perspective is that we're actually not talking about deepfakes anymore, even though deepfakes are really one of the most impactful topics when it comes to AI. In Germany, I actually don't know of that many cases where deepfakes are involved, but worldwide it's happening every day. Even if you take a look at it, especially the biggest deepfakes, for example, if you look at it, team sessions have been deepfaked with several people and so on. So I think the technology has been advanced enough for a long time that it works. I think that other mechanisms, because we're not so digital, are more likely the reason why it doesn't work quite as well here. But what's your opinion on the topic of deepfakes? Do you also see it more like this? Well, we can just treat this under the radar for now, since it doesn't really affect us yet. Or do you see it more like I do and think, why aren't we actually talking about the topic of deepfakes? And why aren't we also talking about measures we can take against deepfakes?
I'd like to try to answer that in a nuanced way, if I may, Nico. Fundamentally, I believe that the reason why society is only now slowly starting to understand that this could be a problem is because, generally speaking, society isn't really used to the fact that these kinds of issues even exist. If you think about it now, I'll just read out the highlights from the AI security report that we published. 81 Gen AI prompts trigger a high-risk data leakage risk. Why? People go into their chatbots and ask them a question. The chatbot stores this information in the learning engine. The next person comes along and, using a reverse engineering prompt that is a prompt that essentially does the opposite of what it's supposed to do, can ask what information input has already been made in this engine in this context. And that's how data leaks happen. For example, a few years ago, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, some clever folks at Samsung had the idea to dump source code into the early generations of ChatGPT and ask, can this code possibly be optimized? Yes or no? And there was feedback. That's a classic case of data leakage. The thing is highly classified, and I just dumped it into something. Sure, somewhere in some documentation it says, we don't really use your training data, maybe just a little, but the data is basically gone and essentially you've thrown it out into the wide open. This shows a naive approach to something that isn't understood. These impersonation attacks, It takes about 10 minutes. And basically, we're just doing the groundwork right now. And I'm going to say this straight out. Please don't do this. I'm saying this now. Don't do this. Do it with Nico. Don't do it with Marco. It takes 10 minutes of spoken language to create synthetic identities that sound like me or like Nico or like the person from television or like Barack Obama or whoever. And from that, you can build yourself an avatar. And then you go to HeyGen, upload a few pictures, or you go to Midjourney and create it there. The tools are available. They're easy to use for a very obvious reason. And the result is that I can build myself a digital twin. And these digital twins, they're not made to do Marco Eggerling's work, where I now send my digital twin to work. And as a real person, I just go sit somewhere on the beach in Mallorca and have a great time for 4 weeks until my boss eventually calls me and says, your twin has crashed. We noticed that you weren't actually working at all, but rather these digital twins are being used simply to interpret the nuances of human behavior and then exploit that as an attack. And of course, you still always have social engineering. Most people in our industry have LinkedIn. There are certainly still some who use Facebook. Then there are others who might have a parallel Instagram chat going on and so on. There are so many data sources. And these AI tools, especially the ones now serving the bad guys, are hungry for input. And everything we feed into them gets used. Everything means everything without exception. You can't just go and check a box and say, please don't use our vacation photos from Facebook. How to infiltrate a personal circle on Facebook without being friends with anyone is now well known. We don't need to go over that anymore. Everything else, whether it's a Snapchat feed, an Instagram profile, or maybe even your own timeline on LinkedIn, these are all things that can now be searched for across the open internet, are indexed and can all be used wonderfully. That's one thing. Then the next point, these malicious tools like GPT Fraud GPT, XXX GPT, Gabashop, whatever they're called, right? They're designed to offer optimized malware as a service. Someone has done the hard work and is now selling it as the first service model. And there are various services for that. And again, let me be clear. Please do not imitate this, okay? We're telling you this, so you've heard it. Take it as an educational measure, but please do not copy it. It will get you into trouble. Not by me, but by some law enforcement agency. They look for you, they'll find you, so please don't do it. They go and rent services for, say, a malware campaign via email, right? Greatness AI is an example of that. And there you pay a few dollars, enter an email address or a domain, and then the thing gets going and sends out things specifically tailored to your use case. And these can simply be phishing emails that are orthographically perfect in all sorts of languages. They can be campaigns that pull in external content. It can be a video, it can be an image, it can be anything imaginable. And they create a synthetic identity, which in turn builds a synthetic reality and then tries to get people to move into this synthetic world. And then you end up in, these chat rooms, Teams, Zoom sessions, Cisco, WebEx sessions, where 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 synthetic identities were in the room with a single real person pretending to be a company. And this person in the end could no longer tell whether they were in the room with their real colleagues or not, and was then coerced, forced in this situation to make a decision that had monetary motives and cost the company a lot of money. And in the end, the damage was done. And that's something, there's no other way to put it than AI is dual use. It helps us on the let's say the emphasized white side to do things right and to automate them, but it also helps the bad actors who are on the dark side to carry out their malicious activities on ecstasy. And of course, they use it just as much as we.
Little Bird told me that we're also using AI to make our podcast Cybersecurity Chefsache into Cybersecurity Share BC level priority in English. So it could be that your profile will show up there as well. But yes, I'm with you on that. But what also needs to be said, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, is that AI is growing so rapidly in terms of quality. So up until I'd say about half a year ago, creating these virtual characters, you mentioned HeyGen, which is what we use as well. You could still see differences. You could notice the synchronization. You could see the lip movements. But now it's so good, that's why I'm doing it, that all the German episodes are being translated into English because you can't tell the difference anymore. honestly, you really can't tell the difference anymore. And you brought up that scenario, which I also wanted to mention, especially with this team chat. And with Teams, the quality is bad anyway. So it's not surprising if, let's say, you don't get a 4K image, but just, well, a lower quality picture. And nowadays, you don't even need, as was mentioned before, a lot of computing power to create a deepfake. You can do all the processing in the cloud these days. So the use cases for deepfakes have become enormous. And to urge companies to really think about this, not to just put it off indefinitely, but to develop processes for how to verify identities, you know? So for example, I always say, as an example isn't the final process, but just as an example, if you're in a meeting like that, use a code word, something simple, right? A code word, for example, or if you say, hey, there are transactions happening, then they can only be done in a certain way, right? I've also seen companies that used hand signals and gestures and so on to basically create a code using gestures, some form of authentication that is independent of the video signal. I think that's more the direction we need to go. But you brought up an important point, and I'd like to go into that a bit more. At the beginning, you mentioned when we started switching between attacker and defender, that even we, meaning myself in my role or you in yours, could at some point be replaced or supported by AI or whatever the case may be. So my question to you is, where do you see the topic of AI within a company? Do you see a new role for it? Or do you think that someone already working in IT or information security should just take this on as an additional responsibility, like so many other roles we already add on top? Or where do you see the responsibility of companies today when it comes to AI?
Here too, I'd like to give a more nuanced answer. Basically, we first have to ask ourselves the question of AI governance, right? If I now introduce AI as a technology platform in a company, then I should first fundamentally ask myself how I am going to govern this thing, because it needs some kind of guardrails, right? That means right now, especially in the world I'm working in, the question is coming up: does AI fall under the CISO? Yes or no? Is it something separate? Could it possibly be its own role that's emerging? Is there maybe a chief AI officer in some organization? Are they on the same peer level as the other C levels? Are they subordinate to something else? There's a lot in flux at the moment, and there's still no clear answer to that question. On the operational level, AI has already been around for quite a while, right? And we're seeing this as well. And now we're back to our AI security report, these malicious AI tools that infiltrate companies, and also the culture of companies that have embraced AI thinking. The diligent employee who effectively utilizes ChatGPT to meticulously polish their professional business email, and the resourceful colleague who skillfully automates and carefully edits an extensive Excel sheet using the powerful Excel tool. These are all compelling and illustrative examples of modern workplace efficiency and technological integration. These are all examples of where potential data leakage can occur within a company. And it wouldn't be the first company. And I've received this feedback from many peers at other companies, as well as from our clients, that the data flow to the AI tools is actually less than the data coming back from the AI. That means a lot of documentation is being created, which then flows back into the company. Create a PowerPoint presentation for me with these points. Imagine I'm the CIO creates a business report for me, or I'm the production manager, write it in a way that sounds cool, make it into a PDF and send it to me. That means as long as there is a balance between the small amount of data going into the tools and the large amount coming back, we can still talk about productivity. If at some point that balance reverses, it becomes difficult, because then I no longer really know what has come out, and even DLP solutions become ineffective. That's the harsh reality. That's just how it is. Can an AI augment an employee? Yes, that's what it's for. That's what we should do. That's what we want. And we don't want to actively prevent it. On the contrary, we should celebrate it, because that's what drives productivity up. Will AI be able to replace an employee in an organization in any way? Probably. I can't give a definitive answer. I would say there's a good chance that it's possible. But Nico, even here, because this discussion has been going on for a few months now, AI will replace all of us and we will all lose our jobs. To put it metaphorically, think of the coal stoker on the old locomotive who kept the boiler furnace running. To keep the the furnace nice and hot, he had to regularly shovel in more coal, which maintained the pressure and kept the locomotive moving. If you look at what the cockpit of an ice train looks like today, there's a guy sitting in front of a digital dashboard with a small control stick and an iPad in his hand. The coal stoker has simply evolved, right? It's still essentially the same job, but of course it's become much more demanding. And while the safety aspect is still the same, making sure that no one gets hurt and that the thing gets from A to B, the security approach behind it has become much more dramatic. You can't hack a piece of coal, but an ice train traveling on the tracks from Hamburg to Munich is exposed to all kinds of risks. And at this point, I'd be ready to say, if you want to advance this topic within your organization, and again, please do get involved with it. I'm an absolute advocate for it. Then put the topic of culture on the table. Training people, raising awareness that these technologies are meant to support us, that it won't run on autopilot or replace us, but rather like in a car, it's an assistance system that helps maintain distance, keeps the speed, maybe assists steering in curves, and perhaps enable some form of autonomous driving. But in my worldview, AI will not lead to us being driven out of our jobs en masse, because at the end of the day, people work with people, and we all know that. You call a company, no matter what it is, and it says, then press 3. So you press 3, and after the 12th time entering numbers, you still get a digital voice, and your problem still isn't solved. At some point, it drives you away, and then you just want to talk to a real person. That's just how people work. We want to work together, and technology supports us. It doesn't replace us.
Maybe a follow-up question right away. Do CISOs today have to buy AI tools just to make the strategy paper look good?
I'm going to be cheeky now. Yes, but only the ones from Checkpoint. No, the answer is it depends. I think by now you can hardly buy any technology on the market that isn't AI-based. There will still be technology that works without AI. There are plenty of technology components where it's simply not needed because they don't require automation or don't have external interfaces, don't use cloud approaches, or where you're not pulling data from the cloud and exchanging it in any way. But let me rephrase the question. Does someone in the role of chief security officer absolutely and necessarily have to work with AI? More and more so as time goes on. But that's the direction I would go. Completely refusing to engage with it now will be difficult because it's simply a market dynamic that has taken on a life of its own. In that role, I see the risks that come with AI. We already touched on this earlier, the blending of truth and fiction, the mixing of real and synthetic data, the emergence of synthetic realities, and also this societal acceptance of if it's on the internet, then it must be true. None of that helps, of course. That's more of a risk than an opportunity. That means you have to actively counteract it. Model hijacking and large language models or small language models that are explicitly targeted to poisoning attacks, where the data underlying these machines and their decision algorithms are actively manipulated in a negative way. These are all things you absolutely have to keep an eye on. Again, these are issues that we actively address in our security report. If you don't know it, please make sure to read it. It's a very good paper that our colleagues from the research team have put together. The most important thing to truly understand is that as someone who has taken on this comprehensive security program, you really have to fully grasp and comprehend both distinct worlds. The part of the company where the business wants to move forward and where, as a company, you simply want to leverage the opportunities of artificial intelligence to develop entrepreneurially, and also the risks that flow into the company from outside and potentially from within through AI, through the use of AI. And by giving employees access to AI tools, this all has to be monitored. And then you have the same balance as with all cyber risks, Nico. It's simply one more thing that's been added. The dynamics are greater. The impact could potentially be more intense. And in my view, the likelihood of it happening is much higher and more probable than with other risks, simply because it has already come so close to companies. But basically, the answer to your question is yes.
But maybe let me ask another question about that. If I now say that AI is so important and that we should be dealing with it, on the other hand, I have a problem again when we talk about transparency, auditability, and also how companies handle my data. Isn't that also in a way a bit of a ball and chain when we talk about AI defense?
The short answer to that question is, oh yes. That's why I mentioned earlier this AI Act that we came up with in the EU. It's a governance framework. Someone in the organization, not in the security office, now has to be occupied with creating legitimate ways to implement governance, to ensure auditability, and ultimately to establish trust-building measures that answer the question, is what we're doing still within the bounds of what we can control? Yes or no? And as long as the answer is yes, and that can be empirically proven, that is evidence-based procedures and not just wishful thinking, then everything is fine. Here's a negative example. I'll leave out the company name now, but it's an American corporation that everyone knows. Their general counsel was with me at a lawyers conference in Zurich last summer. I think it was, and gave a presentation there. This person said that their employer spends a double-digit million amount to remove data that has flowed into data leaks from a customer's interface. They do things with customers, so data from the customer's interface that ended up in these data leaks to get that data back out. That cost them a fortune. Why does that cost them a fortune? Because you can't just go in like you would into a slightly messy basement, look for the red file folder, and that's it. These data structures basically work on the principle of relational databases, just in 4D, right? That means if you want to fish out any tuples or data from there, you first have to figure out how you can even search for them. So if I know I want the answer to the question, do we have anything from Nico? And if Nico, according to the DSGVO or GDPR right to be forgotten, has exercised this right and wants it implemented, I need to be able to answer, I've done it. And that's just one example. Another example is a company has fulfilled a contract, and the contract has a retention period of 90 days, after which it is deleted. It can be part of a contract that things which were invented, created, or in any way produced within this contract become the intellectual property of the customer and do not remain with me. That means I somehow have to ensure and also be able to guarantee that this can actually work. These are all problems that exist in a world where you simply have data structures that can be edited manually. Level one, easy, right? Even though I know that probably every contract lawyer will come after me for this, but let's just assume it's easy. When you look at this in an AI model, it gets a whole lot more complicated.
I'm absolutely with you on that. And I think another topic here is, again, this balance, right? I need AI for my usability topics. And at the same time, on the other side, there's security. And no matter whether it's AI, firewalls, or whatever else we're talking about, for me, security is always the be all and end all, the balance between usability and security. And I think, especially when it comes to AI, we just have to, like you mentioned, the AI Act, for example, but also the point that you don't always have to do everything with AI. We already talked about that earlier. I can also start small with it, especially if I don't have the opportunity to take a closer look at the topic of transparency. Especially what you said as well, whether my data is being used for learning purposes, yes or no. A few weeks ago, there was a huge wave, also driven by consumer protection agencies, regarding a major American provider urging people to object so that their data wouldn't be used for learning purposes. And I found it so incredibly impressive that so many people genuinely didn't notice anything at all about it, or that it ultimately led to those typical chain letters once again. By the way, if you don't object now, then you basically get cancer, you know? So that was a phenomenon that really surprised me, and I was also surprised by how much more happened afterwards. So I had already withdrawn it ages ago, so to speak. I'm probably not the best example, but even days later, I still got the exact same link from my parents, friends, and acquaintances, like, hey, remember, you have to object by this date, otherwise your data will be used for learning. So there was a truly huge wave about this, with people really saying, no, I definitely do not want my data to be used for that, for conducting those kinds of learnings.
That's a recurring problem, which has basically just resurfaced and renewed itself now, yeah. Now, in the specific case of this chat app, the problem was already known, and of course, it was also driven by the mainstream media. My social media feeds were full of it, yeah, and that's a good thing. I really appreciate that. I think it's great that people are actively engaging with this and really trying to answer the question, how do I deal with it? Back then, my focus during my studies was IT law. There was also a very, very strong emphasis on privacy, of course, right? When I think about privacy discussions in the context of artificial intelligence, and now relating it to this example of the Chatterpiff, I start thinking about that. It gives me the creeps, because as a company, I simply can't guarantee that at all. And certainly not in writing. And as a user, as a person, you also have to ask yourself the question, do I actually want to make my chats available as training data in any form? Yes or no? Or do I then switch away? There are plenty of alternatives. There's a Swiss manufacturer that builds a technology that works identically for the tool in question. There's an American-Russian model that works similarly. There are various alternatives. Convenience is usually the main driver that prevents people from switching. That's just how it is. But as humans, we can get over that. But you really have to ask yourself, do I maybe want to have confidential conversations with teammates, things I want to share with someone, my best friend, my girlfriend, husband, wife, dog, or cat? Do I really want to see that made public? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, and I think the answer is no, then maybe I should also consider not using such technologies at all. And the end, I'll try to put this tactfully and carefully. You find yourself in the midst of the current debate about a paradigm shift. Do I still trust the technological components of a particular regime? Yes or no? Are there alternatives from a regime that's closer to me? Yes or no? And what do I do in this interim period, and how do I as a company deal with it? And that's a problem. We have to tackle it culturally. We can't solve it technologically. It doesn't help if some multi-billionaire comes along and throws money at the problem either. If the culture that drives all of this embraces it, then solutions will emerge. But if we just keep our heads down and carry on as usual, then no one has the right to complain, because by consensus, we've decided that it's not so bad after all. However, what we're currently seeing, and this brings us back to deepfakes, disinformation campaigns, and actively bombarding the public with synthetic realities. At the moment, a lot is being suppressed when it comes to this topic, because on the other side of the conversation, and I want to keep this deliberately neutral, as I don't want anyone to feel attacked, because of course, on the other side of the conversation, an enormous amount of energy has been invested over the past 10, 15, 20 years to build something up. And of course, they have no interest in a bunch of Europeans playing the role of a Gallic village and saying, we're going to disconnect ourselves from all of this and build something new, especially since there's a lot of money flowing in there. And Nico, hand on heart, data is money. That means the fewer the data, the less of what was mentioned before, the more, the more. And that brings you back to the discussion about whether this approach that's currently being pursued actually makes sense for us in its current form. Does it look good, yes or no? And if not, then let's change something together. And if yes, then as a society, we simply have to decide and agree that this is good and this is what good looks like.
That's also above all the phrase I always use with my friends. If you get something for free, then you're paying with your data because nothing else makes sense. But you just touched on another aspect a little bit. I'd actually like to dive a bit deeper into that because it's a topic I keep hearing about as well. What does it actually mean if I use open source AI? So open source AI, especially in relation to defense, because here, again, the question is, I have something that's open source, potentially visible to everyone, but it's supposed to provide defense. What's your take on that? Critical.
Why? I mentioned earlier, Hugging Face is basically GitHub just for AI algorithms, right? And, I know I always get a bit of flack from the developer community for saying that even internally with us, because it's not entirely accurate what I'm saying, but in a figurative sense, it's really nothing different. If I go to Hugging Face and similar platforms now and download an algorithm there and create an engine that's basically ready to go, right? And I use it. The code, if I didn't write it myself, Nico, then I might not really understand what that thing is doing. Then I'm running someone else's stuff on my system. And then, of course, I can't be surprised if that thing might be doing things in the background that aren't transparent to me at all, because they're just triggered somewhere in the 200,000th line of code. That's why if it's false technologies, then let's really celebrate them. I've been using Linux for years, and I use operating systems on my mobile phone that are based on a fork that's more focused on security than on convenience. I consciously make my life maybe a bit more complicated, but I focus on making sure that I have more control over my security and privacy than I would with the generic products you can buy in some stores or at electronics discounters. The most important thing when using these FOSS tools is to actively engage with the community. Who is writing this thing? Who is contributing to this technology? What does this thing actually do? And is there any documentation somewhere that proves and describes what it does? If I have an engineering department, folks, look at this code, try to interpret and understand what it does. And if you then find out that it's good for your use case, go for it, then use it. The difference between FOSS and commercial tools is that in the free open source world, there's simply hardly any support. That's it. That means if something breaks somewhere, you have to hope that there's some smart engineer in a Reddit forum who can help you, or maybe not. With commercial tools, Checkpoint Technology is, of course, a commercial technology. Just call our support team, and there's someone there to help you. So, of course, I have two hearts beating in my chest, Nico. On one hand, as a company representative, I say, by all means, buy our software. But as a person and as someone who has been in the industry for a very, very long time, it makes sense. And I believe the hybrid approach is what's crucial and what still helps us a lot, that you experiment a bit, let yourself go with the flow, maybe even develop things yourself, and find a healthy mix between FOSS and commercial tools. These then do what they're supposed to do, as long as they don't interfere with or block business processes or eat up too much development time. Maybe from my side, a final question that I also find really interesting. Looking at today and looking ahead to, let's say, 5 years from now, what do you think will be the next hype topic around AI? Are we then going to be talking about, I don't know, cybersecurity on autopilot, and in the end, we'll just be sitting there with a coffee in hand saying, yeah, this is nice, I'm safe, and everything's fine? Or where do you think we'll see ourselves in 5 years? What if we were to do this podcast again in 5 years? What would our topics be then? I think, well, it's a really fascinating question. I just thought about it for a moment, and I have a tendency to say that by then we'll probably have talked about the aftermath of post-quantum encryption. That's currently emerging as a trend. I think what is currently much, much more devastating in the world of cybersecurity, and what needs to be addressed even more and will really be a trend in 5 years, is creating a corporate culture that embraces information security and doesn't see it as an obstacle. I think this is a topic that could certainly be considered a hype topic in 5 years, that this human factor is more valuable and important for a company in perspective than purely technological components. But if I had to bet money on it right now, I'd say that in 5 years, we'll probably still be mostly struggling with technology trends again. And this whole post-quantum thing is already starting to emerge. That will certainly be a trend, a fashion that will occupy us in 1, 2, or 3 years. And this concern that old emails, which were encrypted with PGP 15 years ago, could then be read by someone again. Honestly, Nico, we can gladly read my 15-year-old emails live here on the podcast. There are certainly a few things in there that I wouldn't want to laugh about. At least I'm not aware of having written anything in emails that's so secret that I would want it to be published in some way. And if I did, it's my own fault. Those are emails, that's like a postcard. You know your risk, right? But that would now be my answer. And please, dear listeners, if we've reached that point and you find my emails, please don't read them. But that's an interesting point you're bringing up right now, because that's also a topic. A lot of people are now asking me, post-quantum encryption. And if I do something now, it has to be super secure so that it will still be safe in the future and all that. And I always think to myself, but at the end of the day, you've lived the last 40 years the same way, or the last 20 years the same way, right? Why should you suddenly jump on this hype and say, oh, everything is suddenly insecure now? And I agree with you. If you write an email, you can't just hide behind a security system and say, now we encrypt emails. But you also need to be aware that an email goes over the internet. And over the internet means potentially anyone could read it, right? Whether that's the NSA, California, or even a rival company. In theory, you always have to keep in mind someone could be reading along. And I found it so funny because you brought it up, like we're talking about the human factor, right? So you think we're heading for a new revolution, and we won't be talking about a shortage of skilled workers anymore, but instead we'll probably be talking about some new hype topic where we say, hey, we don't have a shortage of skilled workers, but rather a shortage of people who can actually use AI properly. Or what would you say? Will it then be more about the human factor? I think I was just talking about this the day before yesterday with someone I met for lunch. I'm a child of the 80s. Now I'm giving away a bit of OSINT for everyone who's already building my chatbot and putting it in the bottom right corner of the screen and making me say things. By the way, please don't do that. The people who started out in IT and have been at it for 20 or 30 years, they helped build the foundations, broke things, and rebuilt them. Today, this abstraction layer doesn't go as deep anymore. That means the understanding of topological topics, of technological details isn't as widespread anymore. I believe that we will definitely reach a point again where we say we're especially interested in the mechanics behind it all and where everything actually comes from. And that we don't just take it for granted that a computer comes in the form factor of a tablet with such a thin monitor, and that in the background there's some instance we call the cloud where all these elves and unicorns live, who make all these things happen. But rather that understanding how this all works will become more important and valuable again. And it would probably have been driven by the point where the culture eventually says, it's no longer enough for me to understand this abstractly. I really want to understand it intrinsically, because the risk landscape, which will have changed the way it has by then, may require it. And then the employees will probably once again be celebrated for their ability not only to experiment and exist on layer 7, but actually to understand what's happening in the basement and one floor below. That's my assessment. Let's see in 5 years, maybe by then we'll all be heading to Mars with Elon, driving cars that run completely without fuel in every way and flying around on Marty McFly's hoverboard. Maybe we'll see.
Well, I would definitely be in favor of the option, just like you said, of exploring the world with flying cars, because I always find it super stressful to get stuck in traffic jams, you know? And what would also make me happy is if there were a way to actually automate my schedule or my calendar. That would be really great if I just had someone who could say yes, accept, decline, schedule a new appointment, back and forth. That would definitely make my workday a lot easier. I don't drink coffee, but then I would treat myself to a cool drink or two and just happily look at my calendar as appointments suddenly disappear and new ones pop up. That would definitely be a future topic that I would really love.
That would be a nice approach. Maybe in 5 years from now, we'll be able to set it up so that our avatars do a podcast together and we just watch the finished product and wonder what kind of nonsense they've come up with again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marco. It was a real pleasure. I think we could talk about this topic for another 20 hours. And above all, thank you so much for your openness and for explaining everything in such depth. You mentioned it several times. I'll include your report in the description. For anyone who's interested, just take a look down in the description. You'll find the links to the report there. So with that, I'd say that's it for this episode of Cybersecurity Chefsache. We'll hear and see each other next time.
See you then. Yes, and from my side as well, thank you very much. I'll keep it brief. Nico, thanks for the invitation. And for anyone interested, you can find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me. Thanks for your interest and stay safe.